I'm too short. Thank you so much for being here. This is a panel about the data revolution. And I'm going to tell you just briefly who I am, a little bit about Till, and then we'll get into it. I am a longtime technology journalist. I started writing about online advertising at the San Francisco Chronicle in 1996, and there were very few ad tech companies. Now it's a huge industry. And for the past 10, 15 years, I've been focusing a lot on privacy and the impacts of our surveillance economy on regular people. And I founded 4 years ago a nonprofit newsroom called The Markup, which writes about the impact of technology on society. And we have no trackers on our website, no third-party tracking, and we heavily limit any use of personal data. We don't even really know who our readers are. And it's a challenging way to live, but it is something that we think builds trust with our audience. And since we are based on donations, it's an attempt to build trust so that people will donate to support our journalism. And for a long time, I was a user of Till's product, AdBlock Plus. I've been using it, I don't know, since whenever it came out. And so how many people here use AdBlock Plus? All right, okay, so.
Good crowd.
Till is the co-founder of eyeo, which is the company that supports AdBlock Plus. And so we're going to talk about the data revolution. And I think the thing that is important to think about is that the data revolution is really a personal data revolution, right? It was never previously possible to track human behavior on the scale that we can currently track it because of the online environment and how much data trails are left behind when you use technology, and we all use technology every single second. So I thought we should just start with the idea of what does it mean to have a world where everything we do is tracked, and what is the problem with that?
Well, certainly from my perspective, we live in a world, as you pointed out, where so much data about us is collected, and what consumers want to have is transparency and control over that. And I think we're in a world also where there's this inherent conflict between privacy and monetization, and as long as this conflict exists, real choice and real control for consumers is very hard to achieve, which I think requires the entire industry to collaborate, because we've seen with ad blocking, you talked about our product AdBlock Plus before, if people don't trust how their data is handled, they will protect themselves against abuse, just like how users are protecting themselves against intrusive and annoying ads by installing an ad blocker.
Right. Well, I want to push back a little bit on what you said about users wanting transparency and control, because actually, that's a lot of work, right? Anyone who's ever tried to go into your ad preferences manager and look at what is known about you and adjust it, and also knowing that that's actually not the full picture. I think if you think about it, I like to think about it in terms of seatbelts. So there was a time when cars didn't have seatbelts, and all the auto manufacturers fought against putting them in because they said it was really expensive and you should just drive safer. And I sometimes think that's sort of where we are with data right now. And so the question is, do we want transparency and control, meaning like we can see inside the car and we could put in our own seatbelt if we wanted to? Or do we want actually just to mitigate harm, right? And if you mitigate harm, that means you just install seatbelts, force people to wear them with laws, and then add airbags. And so I wonder, AdBlock Plus is, where does it fit into that analogy? Are you guys the seatbelts and the airbags, or?
I think what AdBlock Plus does, it empowers users to have control over their online experience. But what we as a company are all about is really facilitating a healthy value exchange between the users on the one hand, the publishers, and the advertisers. Because ultimately, all those stakeholders, they have very different interests, conflicting interests, but the truth is in the middle, and this is exactly what we are aiming to facilitate.
So one thing, I don't know how many people know this, but one thing, the innovation that's happened with eyeo owning AdBlock Plus, which used to be more of an independent tool developed by one guy. Maybe you can tell us the story.
Yeah, originally AdBlock Plus was developed all the way back in 2006 just as an open source free tool that people could install. And then it gained a lot of popularity because more and more people wanted to have control over their advertising experience. And my co-founder, Vladimir, he's the original developer of AdBlock Plus. And him and I got together with the idea that users, of course, have very legitimate interests why they want to block certain ads. At the same time, obviously, publishers need to monetize if we want to ensure that there is great content, high quality journalism, if we want that content to be accessible for everybody. Then we need to figure out how do we make advertising work. And we started a program called Acceptable Ads, where our goal is to figure out what is exactly that perfect balance between those conflicting interests, wanting to block ads on the one hand and wanting to monetize with the ads on the other end, because ultimately both sides are right.
And so if I understand it correctly, Acceptable Ads is a program where advertisers pay you to be allowed to show their ads to people who would have otherwise blocked them, right? And so there's an argument you could make, which is this is a pay-to-play situation, where it's like you pay to get around the roadblock. Is that fair?
No, absolutely not. I think the key is a compromise like this can only work if we have the trust and the support of our users. That is the key asset. Now, worldwide, over 250 million users are part of the Acceptable Ads program, which I think supports the idea of allowing users to browse the web without annoying ads, but at the same time encouraging them to be part of a fair value exchange with publishers and content creators by allowing certain non-intrusive ads to be displayed. And specifically for that purpose, we set up an independent nonprofit organization that develops this standard, what we call the Acceptable Ads Standard, with the goal to figure out what is that perfect balance between a great user experience and sufficient monetization opportunities for publishers.
And what is an acceptable ad? It used to be, right, that if you weren't a pop-up ad, you were acceptable, right? Then we decided, okay, if your video autoplay is really annoying, right, so maybe that's not acceptable. But I would say for me, what I want out of an ad is I want it not to be tracking my behavior. Is that acceptable? So I also don't want it to track my location. So I'm curious, what are the criteria for what is an acceptable ad?
So the criteria, obviously, they need to evolve, right? It should not be a static standard, which is why we set up this committee with different coalitions. We have a for-profit coalition, a user coalition, and an expert coalition that defines this standard. The current standard is very much focused on the format of the ad, because what we've experienced is that most people are concerned about the annoyance level of an ad format. You pointed out pre-roll video ads, which are generally disliked by a lot of people. So the current standard defines ads that are non-intrusive, that don't interrupt you while you're reading an article. You can focus on that article, and the ads are more unobtrusive instead of staying in your way. And
do advertisers pay you to be on this list?
We work with most of the largest websites in the world. Of the ComScore top 10, we're working with 9 of them. Out of the ComScore top 100 websites, 63 of those publishers are part of the Acceptable Ads program, and we're able to help them monetize this very unique audience of people that are opted in to this Acceptable Ads program, which generates very significant revenue uplift for them, and we take a revenue share on the incremental revenues that our partners generate as a result of working with us.
I got it. And so you are a pretty large organization now. What is your revenue?
I think the latest public revenue numbers where we're above 70 million in revenue. We're now a team of almost 300 people worldwide from over 40 nationalities. And this really supports working on this value exchange that ultimately creates a lot of value for users. It creates opportunities for publishers to monetize better, and it provides access for advertisers to a very unique but highly valuable audience of tech-savvy, sophisticated users.
And these days, there's a lot of changes going on in the market. A lot of the web browsers have said they're going to stop allowing third-party cookies by default, which is basically I would say the bread and butter of advertisers. And so how does that change the landscape?
Well, I think it creates an opportunity for innovation, because people have been using cookies for a long time. Now everybody knows they're going away. So this creates an opportunity to rethink how can we maybe overcome this inherent conflict between privacy and monetization. So I think there are a lot of industry efforts. Our company is working on some of them as well, where we're trying to bridge that gap, where we're giving real choice, real control to consumers, while at the same time ensuring that advertising still can be relevant for the people who see it.
I mean, I know this is sort of heresy in this room, but I don't understand why ads have to be targeted to your behavior or your demographics. I think brand advertising used to be amazing, right? When I worked at the Wall Street Journal, it was the way that paper made all of its money was the fact that was the way you reached a middle manager who golfed and drove a BMW. Was the best way to get him was at the Wall Street Journal. And so you were, as an advertiser, affiliating yourself with that brand. And I realize I'm throwing back to some ancient times that most of you are like, what? That's over. But it has been devastating for journalism to not be able to monetize high quality content and instead have to play in this world of tracking people's clicks and therefore having to create huge volumes. And so I guess I just wonder if there's any possibility that we could go back to this sort of brand relevancy model.
No, I think it's a very relevant point, that because it's possible to reach the same audience that visits the Wall Street Journal, also in other places, advertising revenue for publishers has been going down, because no longer it's required to pay premium price exactly to reach this audience, which as a result has led to publishers being forced to compensate for those decreasing revenues by allowing more and more aggressive ads on their sites. So this has really created a downward spiral or a vicious cycle in which ads become more and more aggressive, at the same time less and less valuable for publishers and high quality journalism. So this is where we want to come in with our acceptable ads program as well, where fewer but more high quality ads provide not only a better user experience, but also more value for publishers. And just one more point I would like to add to this is that while I think there are certainly brands like the Wall Street Journal out there that can attract advertisers to buy ads on that site, I think we also need to ensure that there's diversity of opinion, that also small publishers can profitably generate and distribute their content.
Mm-hmm. Well, as a small publisher, I agree, although we have no ads on our site. And we're entirely supported by donation. There's a lot of talk here and other places about how users can get control of their data. And there's a lot of proposals out there, the blockchain, personal data lockers, Google's privacy sandbox. And I'm curious what you think about that, because I have yet to see any of them work.
Yes. I think everybody's talking about transparency and control, right? Yep. But if we're actually being honest, right now, even in the EU, where we have GDPR, so it's required by law, it doesn't actually exist. When it comes to the GDPR opt-in dialogues, you have all kinds of dark patterns. You actually would need, I heard in a masterclass the other day, you would need 72 days a year to actually read all the privacy policies of all the services that you use. And for the average user, certainly they're not readable or understandable. So I think what we need to build really is an honest web where there's really actual choice and control for consumers. But right now, if we have this conflict between privacy and the ability to monetize, there will always be pushback against actually providing this choice and control to consumers. So this is really what we aim to overcome, to remove this conflict between privacy and the ability to monetize well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, but like, it is an interesting question about whether, it's an interesting moment where a company like yourself can sit there and be the arbiter, right, of this debate between privacy and monetization. Because I would say, my thought would be that would be maybe more of a government regulator role. And so what we're in is a world where it's a Wild West, right? So everyone is sort of got their own arbiters. And I think it's an interesting question, like how you guys are your own sort of arbiters. You decide what is the acceptable ad and how we're all going to live in this world.
Well, I think you make a very good point that ultimately the legislation is out there, right? But the implementation, of course, that is the key of what we have to get right. The law already says, at least in Europe, you have to provide transparency and control to consumers, but it doesn't specify for good reasons exactly how it's implemented. And this is, I think, where we have an opportunity to create much better experiences. Also looking at where do people actually exercise this control. Should you make decisions on your targeting preferences on every single website that you visit, or is that something that should rather live more on the user agent level, inside the browser, for example, so that you can make real choices once that are being honored across the web?
This was tried, right? There was a thing called Do Not Track, and you had it was in the browser, and it was sent a message to all the websites, and they didn't comply, right?
Right, because Do Not Track basically said those users that enabled it, they were very hard, if not impossible, to monetize. So I believe what we need to establish is a way where users can protect their privacy, protect their data, but we have to take the other stakeholders into consideration so that these users are not lost as an opportunity to be monetized for publishers, content creators. The websites that provide access to high quality content, like real great journalism, which is so important in the current times that we live in.
Yeah, and journalism is being, the funding for journalism in the US has fallen in the last 20 years, from 30 billion to 10 billion. And online advertising has grown to 180 billion. And so it's a really terrible time for journalism. And I just want to say that actually what that means is journalism is not just an industry, but it also means it's a terrible time for democracy. And so it is incredibly important that we solve this problem, because if journalism can't be funded by advertising, which currently it really cannot, we need other models. And, or, like you said, maybe you're going to find the magic bullet that solves it with everybody being happy at the end. But I have to say, I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, I think we have made a proposal how we think all those different ideas can be balanced. And I think it requires, of course, broader industry adoption. We don't want an eyeo-specific solution, we don't want a Google-specific solution, but ultimately what we see as well is also how much traction we have generated with over 250 million people participating in the value exchange that we're proposing. So we, of course, continue to invite more industry participation in this.
And so what do you have to say to the marketers here in the audience about how to participate and what is the way forward? I'm assuming that many people in this audience are marketers or publishers or both.
Well, to all the marketers in the room, I would of course say that there is a highly valuable audience of people who can be reached. They are very well educated, tech savvy, they have above average income. They purchase a lot of products online, but those users, they are more demanding than maybe the average user. So you can reach those users, but you should reach them on their terms instead of trying to force an ad experience on them that they clearly dislike. It's so much more sustainable and so much more profitable to acknowledge their preferences and give them the ad experience that actually works with this particular niche of users.
And can you make an experience for me, which is I want one that's not targeted based on my behavior. I want it to be related to the content I'm looking at. So I want, you know, if I'm reading a sports website, sports advertising. I know this is archaic, but
Just, you mentioned you're a user of AdBlock Plus. You can just go to the settings and opt out of any tracking, and then everything will be gone.
Ah, wonderful. Okay. Well, thank you very much. This is a great conversation. And all of you, thank you for listening. And please support journalism. It's very important.
Thank you very much. And I definitely agree.